Hello and welcome! Today we are going for a wander down memory lane as we take a look back through the history of Warhammer 40k army deals. Join me as we talk about all things collector sets, going way back to the dawn of 40k and work our way forward through several later generations. First things first, so Games Workshop have a long history of providing army deals. I'm not talking here necessarily about the one-off in the back of White Dwarf or in Troll magazine, hey, pay us this money and we'll give you this collection of models plus, a few select bits. I'm talking about mainstream army deals that were available in store to buy or were advertised in White Dwarf right at the front as a special splash new release. Now I know, of course, that we get this fairly regularly. In fact, it seems like every Christmas, 4 or 5 new army deals for every version of the game are rolled out. But I want to take you way back, do the kind of the Wayne's World time travel maneuver here, to the dawn of 2nd edition 40k. As far as I can see, charting backwards, this is the first appearance of what we would come to think of as classic Warhammer army deals. So, here we go. First up to bat, the first one that I can find there being any record of, somewhat appropriately, is a Space Marine army deal. This was available in 2nd edition. It came as a big white cardboard box full of smaller boxes and stacks of polystyrene. You could get it in store, but it was also available from mail order. But within this, you got a whole selection of miniatures that were available in the store for a special price that meant that you saved money buying the army as a whole. So as you can see, it was marketed as an Ultramarines army deal. It did quite well, so it was very swiftly followed by an Eldar army deal. Now what's interesting, I think, is in terms of the models that you got in this set in particular, it was all entirely metal. I think the only thing that's not metal in this set is the plastic Guardian boxes that came in it. Every other miniature in this set is metal. It must have weighed a ton. In fact, talking to Mike from my Tale of Four Gamers set, he says he's got most of one of these, and yeah, it was a hefty chunk of tin when it came through. But what's interesting, I think, is the price point for these, as far as I can track, going back through the pages of White Dwarf, back in the sort of early 1990s when these became available, was about £100 or 120 or thereabouts, which, when you compare it to some of the army sets that are coming out today, is not that far off. The Eldar one was very swiftly followed by a Blood Angel one. This one's quite cool. This is a picture of all the contents that you got inside the Blood Angels one. As you can see, it is literally a selection of the Blood Angels boxes. But what I have a particular fondness for this set for is this is a picture of, I think it's Mike's set. And as you can see, the cover art on it had a display with a particular shrine that would crop up in a lot of battle reports in White Dwarf throughout this era. Mike actually went to the trouble of recreating this scene in essence. So he's painted up, as you can see, all of his Blood Angels that he got from this set in exactly the style of the cover art on the box. And actually he's also gone to the trouble of recreating with a 3D printer the shrine that featured on the cover of this, which I think is very cool, and hopefully we'll get a game in at some point against this army where we can use that scenery in the battle report. But so, much like the Space Marine one, and the it's marketed as Space Marine Army, but it is very much, I think, a Blood Angels army deal. It was closely followed by a very distinctly Space Wolf army deal, and a Chaos Space Marine army deal. So I think once the proof of concept had been shown that the Ultramarines army deal was working quite well, Games Workshop rocked out fairly swiftly army deals for all of the other major armies that were making up 40k during 2nd edition. Interestingly, I can't find a trace of a Dark Angels army deal at this point, and I suspect that may well have been because they didn't have the same number of unique units that had models compared to, for example, the Space Marine was with its, the Space Wolves with its Grey Hunters and Blood Claws and unique Terminators and so forth, or the Blood Angels with their Death Company and their Death Company Chaplain and their unique Dreadnought. After we'd had these, then we hit back with the rest of the Xenos, so the Space Orcs got their own army deal, and the Tyranids likewise got their own army deal. And again, all of these were very much kind of a whole army in a box. Given the way in which points values worked in 2nd edition, you didn't need a huge army. So buying one of these army deals, when it said army on the box, it really meant this is a whole army. What's kind of cool is there's then kind of a second wave of army deals that came in towards the end of 2nd edition. I think kind of the last 2 years of 2nd edition, they released an updated Space Marine army deal, which is the Space Marine Strike Force. And as you can see, this one is unique in that it features the new Scout models that came out towards the end of 3rd edition, and the plastic Terminator models that replaced the earlier metal ones. That was then followed up with some special new release army boxes. This is the best picture that Mike and I could find of the Sisters of Battle army deal. I do apologise that it's not particularly high detailed. What is quite cool about this one though is it came with the sticky banners for the Sisters of Battle, so you could not only paint your army up to match the whichever order Majoris you wanted to paint it up as, but it would come with the banners that you needed to then have your icon bearer display the sacred red banner of whatever order you painted your Sisters of Battle as. The Dark Angels, as I said, they didn't get their own army deal early in 2nd edition. They did, however, get this, and this is one of my favourite army deals. I don't own this one. I really wish I had. Interestingly, I found out whilst researching this that Nick Davis of White Dwarf fame and part creator of 3rd edition 40k actually was the photographer who did the photography for this. I think for the Imperial Fists one I'm going to show you in a few minutes. And yeah, I think it's quite cool that this was actually the Dark Angels army deal that they released. It isn't a whole army in a box. I mean, at this point it's more of a, as they say, an attack force. This was a unique selection of the Ravenwing models that they'd released together with the shiny new Chaplain model that was released at the time. Then, likewise, they continued that vein and they did the Space Marine Supremacy Force, which was when they produced these moulded metal shoulder pads for Imperial Fists that had been lacking before that. I know a lot of people who've got this, and some of them have painted, for example, my friend Marcus painted his up as Crimson Fists instead. Nothing to stop you doing that. But again, this was part of that kind of second wave of army deals where they gave you a slightly more tailored or unique force. So this, again, it's not all the models that they do for Space Marines. In fact, it's only a bike squad, a tactical squad, some plastic Terminators, and some characters, albeit it did feature a unique Imperial Fists captain. This is one, however, that I did own, and I do still have the box sleeve of this. I don't have the box that the miniatures came in, but I have all the miniatures and the box sleeve. So, the Praetorian 24th. I'm going to do a whole video about these guys at some point. They are worthy of their own video. I've already talked about Big Tooth River in one of my earlier videos when I talked about the White Dwarf that they featured in. But yeah, this was miniatures that had been produced especially for Games Day, that had featured as part of the Games Day display, that everyone went, oh my god, how do I get my hands on those? And so Games Workshop released it as a separate army deal. But interestingly, this is, as far as I can tell, during 2nd edition, the only Imperial Guard army deal that got released, which, I mean, that's quite fascinating in its own way. Then we move on into the days of 3rd Ed. Now, 3rd Ed, there are a lot of army deals. I think by this point they realised that given it was a whole new edition and a lot of the ranges were getting entirely revitalised or replaced, this was an ideal way to produce army boxes that would allow your gamers to collect a whole new army. And this ties into something that they released around and about that time, which we take for granted now, which is battle forces. So now, of course, we've got combat patrol boxes, we've got boarding patrol boxes, we've got boxes coming out of our ears, we've got start collecting boxes. Every army has its own starter box. That was not a thing before 3rd edition 40k. That was kind of the initial launch of the idea of what if we did a start collecting box for each army that featured a selection of the models that you got within that army that gave you a firm basis on which that you could then build. And then those battle forces, as they were called, were then featured quite heavily in each of the army deals. So each army deal would then become a larger cardboard box which contained a battle force and a selection of other units. First one that I can track, interestingly, they didn't, as far as I can tell, do a Space Marine one of these. The Space Marines didn't get their battle force, in fact, until sometime after the other armies had theirs, which, I mean, that's kind of interesting, I suppose. But Dark Eldar, then, is the first army deal that I can track from 3rd edition 40k, and I'm sure someone's going to come up in the comments and tell me I'm wrong in this regard. But the Dark Eldar army deal gave you the new Dark Eldar warriors that, for now, I think perhaps we look back on and maybe we mock a little bit. They are a little bit silly with their giant head blades that, I can imagine them turning around and accidentally taking someone's head off. But this gave you the core troops choice that you needed for your army. It gave you a selection of the other plastic kits they did, the Raider and the Ravager, and it also gave you the jet bikes and a couple of the metal character models. So it was a good starting point for your army. And interestingly, they would then supplement this later on with another Dark Eldar battle force that contained some of the additional Dark Eldar units that were released later in 3rd edition 40k. So Dark Eldar kind of got 2 bites of the cherry in that regard. The second one featuring some of the more specialised witch weapons and some of the specialised kind of special weapons options that came for the Jetbike Riders. After Dark Eldar then, it was time to essentially revamp or re-release some of the earlier models. So Tyranids got an army deal. Now this is kind of sad in its way that this wasn't new Tyranid models. There weren't new Tyranid models on the horizon, and there wouldn't be for quite some time. But so Games Workshop popped out essentially a Tyranid army deal that just featured a whole selection of models that featured from 2nd edition that you could now use in 3rd edition, and to try and encourage people to go, hey, just because it's a new edition doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to get new rules, new models I should say. But here is a starter army. This is stuff that you could use to make a core army in 3rd edition. And as you can see, it's got Termagants in there, it's got Hormagaunts, it's got Gene Stealers, it's got essentially 3 troops choices, a HQ and a heavy support, and I think elites for the Zoanthrope. But yeah, so this was the Tyranid army deal that they released. Chaos were up next. Now, Chaos did eventually get some new models, but at this point, the only new models that featured in this box, as far as I can see, is the Chaos Lord model that they released when they released the 3rd edition Chaos Codex, and the Chaos Predator and the Raptor models. The Chaos Space Marines, the Dreadnought, the Terminators, the Khorne Berserkers, I suppose they were new. Yeah, thinking about it, I tend to think the Khorne Berserkers models being so old that they predate this, but actually the Khorne Berserker models were new at the point that this army box released. So thinking about it, yeah, this actually does contain quite a few new releases for 3rd edition Chaos 40k. But again, this is one of these ones that was composed of, as you can see, a Battle Force set, which contained the Khorne Berserkers, the bikes, I think, and I think it's the Rhino, and then metal models, so the Terminators, the Chaos Lord, the Dreadnought, and the Predator with its metal upgrade parts on a plastic Rhino chassis. After this comes something special. So this is the point when Codex Armageddon released. Armageddon was a new idea. It was this idea of not just having a codex, but having a supplement that gave you additional rules to use in conjunction with your original codex. So 3rd edition 40k, I will do a whole video talking about it at some point, but 3rd edition 40k, the codices were very cheap. I mean, like the most expensive codex, I think, was £8. The idea being that they could then release these £4 essentially appendices that were they were very flimsy. I mean, they were maybe 20 pages at most of which was the colour section. But so by releasing, for example, Codex Armageddon, which was a supplement for the Orc Codex or the Space Marine Codex or the Imperial Guard Codex, you got additional rules for unique armies that were essentially an add-on to the existing rules in those codices. And it gave them a chance to tell a whole new narrative campaign, which I've gibbered about already in a previous video, but it also gave us four army deals. So, first things first, Ghazghkull Thrakker's Armageddon army deal. I've got a couple of pictures for you here. This is just showing you what was in the box. As you can see, it's a mix of the new Orc plastic kits and, interestingly, Gorka Morka kits. Because at this point, Gorka Morka was still a going thing, and they'd had shed loads of models produced for that. Well, let's put it in a way. They'd had shed loads of models packaged for that, let's put it in those terms, which were still in that packaging and were then kind of just rolled into the Orc release and into this army deal. So the War Truck, the War Buggy, the War Track, and the War Bikes in this, so you can all see there, I've got the Gorka Morka branding on them. But this gave us the metal Ghazghkull Thrakker model. It gave us a whole bunch of stuff. And as you can see, it gave us all of this for about £100, which is a pretty good bargain. I think if you saw this on the shelf now for £100, you'd go, wow, that's a pretty good deal. But not only that, we got 2 further Space Marine army deals out of this. The Salamanders got their first unique army release. Their own rules were published in the Codex Armageddon and then kind of repeated again, I suppose, in the Index Astartes articles that they were running at the time. But this gave us a unique character, Chaplain Xavier, a whole bunch of extra kind of plastic and metal kits, and the new Land Raider. This is an amazing value for money kit. I can't believe that we got essentially a Land Raider, which was like a £25 kit. It may have even been £30 in essentially a £100 army deal. It meant that you were getting all the rest of that stuff at most like 70 quid. It was a cracking deal. And much the same for the Black Templar army deal that they rolled out at the same time. You got the Land Raider Crusader in there, and I think they did a special Black Templars Marshal model that was kind of an homage was paid to it in the most recent Primaris Black Templars release. But again, you got the Crusader squads, you got assault squads, you got the Crusader, you got land speeders, and a whole command squad, and the specialist captain model, all for £100. In many respects, I think this is perhaps the best bargain of the lot. The Imperial Guard, on the other hand, the Steel Legion, you only got, I think, you got 3 guard squads in that box, and the old man Yarick himself, who got his new model that would then remain his model all the way through the rest of his life, up until, as rumour has it, Angron did him in. You got 3 of the new metal Sentinel models and a Chimera in there. I think perhaps this is the less well-valued model. I suppose it's the most metal models compared to the other kits, which were combination plastics. In this, really, only the Chimera and bits of the Sentinel are plastic. Almost everything else in this is metal, which is perhaps why, points-wise, it's the poorest, albeit weight-wise, it was probably the heaviest box. But so, after the Armageddon army deals then, finally, the new Tyranid models rolled out, and we got a Tyranid army deal. And again, £100 for a big old box of lead. This got you the new Hormigants, new Termagants models, new Gene Stealers, the new Plastic Warriors kit. You got a Hive Tyrant, you got the grinny, smiley Carnifex model they released at the time, the Zoanthrope model, and a bunch of Gargoyles, and a Biovore. Again, I think if we saw this on the shelf today, we would go, that is an extremely good value for model money kit, whether it was a plastic box or a metal box like this. But yeah, Tyranids got their army released at that point, and then they snuck out a plastic Guard release. So this was the point when the plastic Catachan models, which I think are still the plastic Catachan models today, were released, and they released an army deal which featured essentially, it's a Catachan battle force with some additional metal models thrown in there. So it's things like the snipers, the heavy flamers, the demolition charge guys, and some plastic trees, because of course Catachans have to have trees to hide behind. Apologies that I couldn't get a better picture for this than this. If anyone's got one, please point me in that direction. I want to talk a little bit now about Eldar. The Eldar got probably the most army deals during Third of any army ever. So they released an Eldar army deal during the 3rd edition. This essentially is much like the others. It's a plastic battle force, which I think was a Viper. I think it was a Falcon, some Guardians, and some 3 jet bikes. It was a pretty good value for money plastic battle force. But in this then, they've also crammed the metal Warp Spider models, the metal Dire Avenger, a metal and plastic combo kit actually, models, the Seer Council, or combination thereof, Howling Banshees, support weapons, and a Phoenix Lord. It is a stonking army deal. And it's not the only one they did for the Eldar, because they then went on to do them for every single craft world. So they did a Yandan one, which was made up of tons of metal models. I mean, this was, I think, 2 squads of 10 Wraithguard, 3 Wraith Lords, a whole bunch of Warlocks to kind of lead the Ghost Warriors, and the plastic Guardians, and some support metal models as well, and a Farseer. For the Ulthway, they did, again, it's 3 of the Warwalker models. It is 2 of the kind of Black Guardian models, as they called them. So essentially it was the Guardian kit with some metal upgrades, some metal swords and shuriken pistols. It was a full Seer Council. So you've got 2 Farseers, 4 Warlocks. There was a Fire Prism in there. There was Eldrad Ulthwan in there. For the Simhan, it was... I mean, they threw an Avatar in the Simhan box. There's a Falcon, there's 2 Vipers, there's a swarm of jet bikes, there's a Fire Prism, and just, because why not, there's some Guardians in there as well. There was the BL Tan one, which is basically all the Metalcraft Aspect Warriors that they'd released at that point. So you've got your Fire Dragons, your Banshees, your Scorpions, your Dire Avengers. Let's throw a Farseer, throw a Avatar in there. Let's throw, a Wraith Lord in there, and a Warwalker, because why not? You're going to want some heavy weapons. Let's throw a Falcon in there to transport some of those Aspect Warriors into combat, and the Dark Reapers at the back there as well. And let's not forget a plastic Guardian box, because everybody gets a Guardian box. You get a Guardian box. You get a Guardian box. You get a Guardian box. Breathe. Eldar, they absolutely went to town on in terms of army deals. So yeah, I think 3rd edition, if you were an Eldar player, was probably the best edition to collect Eldar. After the Eldar then, it's time to talk about the 2 new armies that came out during 3rd edition 40k and through into 4th edition 40k. Both of these then were launched by this point as an established model, which was a big army deal. It was launched as a unique army deal with the Codex already inside the box. So this was your first opportunity to get the rules for that army, but also to get a unique model that was released only available through that army deal. So the Tau, the communist fishmen, burst onto the galactic scene with an army deal that clocked in at about £125. But as you can see, it was all of the models that were available in the Tau range at that point. So there was a Devilfish, there was the Fire Warriors, Crisis Suits, Broadside, all the group models that were available at that point. There was Pathfinders. There wasn't a Hammerhead, but the Hammerhead hadn't been released yet by this point. But there was a unique ethereal model sculpted by Michael Perry that was only ever available in this box set, and there are a few of them floating around on eBay. Now, I sadly gave mine away to a friend of mine, so I don't have it anymore, but they go for a fair amount on eBay, which is quite cool. The Tau were followed onto the scene by the Necrons, and again, this was your only way to get the Codex first, is if you bought the Necron army deal. You got plastic Necron warriors with the weird glowing green rods, which I suppose at the time was an entirely unique venture. I mean, they'd done plastic cockpits on things like the Falcon and the Viper, but extending that technology to the idea of doing the green rods to go inside the gun barrels was kind of revolutionary. But again, there was a unique model that came with this army deal, which was the, I don't know if you can see it in the middle there, the Necron Lord model. I'm not as much of a fan of this model as the Ethereal, partly because the end of the staff was basically a little metal jot that you glued the clear plastic rod onto the end of the staff, then you glued the little bobble on the end. But there are some of them floating out there in the wild, and this picture actually comes from Mengel Miniatures, so thanks Tyler Mengel for sending me a picture of this one, which was otherwise hard to track down. But again, as you can see, Necron Warriors, Immortals, Wraiths, Tomb Spiders and Destroyers, and the Scarab models that came on the same sprues as the Warriors at that point, and that unique Lord. It's after this point then, after the Tower release, after the Necron release, that Games Workshop really kind of hit on what I think is the final utility of these army deals that they had started out producing way back in 2nd edition. So after the Necron army deal, the next big release is the Space Marine Megaforce. This was released for Christmas time. It was only £75. So for somebody who was looking for a Christmas present for a Warhammer-obsessed kid under 100 quid, this was a good deal, and it was basically just a £50 Space Marine battle force with a Predator and a plastic Dreadnought thrown in there as well. But for only £25 more, which is a pretty good bargain. It's basically the equivalent of getting one of those vehicles for free. And yeah, they must have sold out of those from memory. I think I was working at Games Workshop at the time, and they were just flying off the shelves that Christmas. That then was followed up then by the next big, what I think of as Army Force, and this was, again, it was the idea of producing an army in a box. The Space Marine Army deal, this was kind of a compilation of all of the plastic sets that had been released during 4th edition in the run-up to 5th edition. So the Plastic Captain, Plastic Command Squad, the Razorback, which was the new kind of Rhino chassis, the Plastic Tactical Squad, the Plastic Assault Squads. The only metal models in this set are the Scouts, which is the Sniper Scouts with the Missile Launcher and a Metal Sergeant. This, again, at a price point of between 100 and 125 quid, it did gangbusters. It was followed up, therefore, by when they finally redid the Chaos Army, when they did the new plastic Chaos Space Marines, which replaced the plastic ones that had kind of been kicking around since 2nd edition, the kind of the monopose models that come as 5 in a box for a £5. They produced a whole Chaos Army deal, which I think actually is even better value for money than what you got in the Space Marine Army deal. There's a Land Raider in there, there's a Vindicator, there's a Defiler. This was the launch of the Defiler model. There's the Plastic Terminators, Plastic Terminator Lord. Of course, there's the Plastic Chaos Space Marines. There's Rhinos, and there's a whole swathe of the plastic spiky bit sprue that enabled you to just stick church railings on the roof of all of your vehicles, because apparently that's part of the Chaos aesthetic. Who knew? But so from this point, Games Workshop then really, there was no stopping them. It was army deals all the time. And that's kind of where we still find ourselves today. So for example, any time a range got updated, that was an ideal opportunity to just pump out some kind of army force box. Like for example, this Orc Spearhead box that I'm showing you here, where you can see you've got a combination of the new plastic models that they'd released, like the plastic truck, the plastic bikes, but also some of the new metal models that they'd released, like the metal shock attack gun, the metal tank busters kit. It was really just a way of kind of showcasing the new releases. For players who had existing Orc armies, it was a way of adding the new models in kind of a lump sum drop. It was usually a way of saving some money as well, but for Games Workshop it was a way of producing guaranteed sales and connecting with their gamers in a way that kind of showed that they wanted to deliver these models still in a way that made them a one-drop shop, in essence. I know I'm fanboying a little bit here, but I get quite excited about the idea that second edition army deal that we saw right back at the start of this video, the evolution that it has followed through the kind of the Christmas army deals now, where people wait with bated breath to see what the Christmas army deals are going to be. People complain if their army isn't one of the army deals that features at Christmas. The unique special edition army deals that we saw during 8th and 9th, I've got one right here, from my very first ever video, the Beast Snagger Orcs release set, which again, it goes back, I suppose, to the same thing as the Tau army set, where you got a unique character that was only available at the time in this box. You got a copy of the rules. That was your first opportunity to get your hands on the rules in this box. It's always led us all the way to the point where we are now with what I've got here on the table in front of me, and that is the Combat Patrol boxes. And I want to talk briefly just about Combat Patrol. Combat Patrol, I think, is the natural evolution of the army deal, and it's a great idea. It's taking that idea of going, look, here is a collection of models that start your army. Here is a character, a troop's choice, and something cool that starts an army, but takes it to its natural evolution of here is a character, a troop's choice, and something cool, with rules that enable you to play that as a force against a friend's army. So I can buy this box set of Necron Combat Patrol, Mike can buy a box set of an Eldar Combat Patrol, and then as soon as we've got them built, we've got two armies ready to game, and we've got two armies that Games Workshop have designed to be balanced against each other. So that if I wanted to introduce somebody to 40k now, I can say, hey, let's play Combat Patrol. You get a Combat Patrol box, I'll get a Combat Patrol box. We stick them together and we're good to go. Across the dining room table we go. Way back like how I started gaming, playing with my mates. I love the idea that that is where army deals have led us to. The idea of an army deal in a box that is tailor designed to be an effective, playable force against a whole range of other effective playable forces. It's a great idea. I'm going to do a Combat Patrol video at some point. Let me know in the comments if that's something you'd be excited to see. I love the idea of... there's all kinds of things you can do with Combat Patrol. I'm not going to spam you with those now. Suffice to say then, that's the journey that I wanted to take you on from those initial cardboard boxes full of smaller cardboard boxes full of lead to the custom designed Combat Patrol boxes that we have now. Thank you for coming on this journey with me. I hope you've enjoyed it. And as ever, thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments below if there's anything you'd like to see or anything I've missed. Click subscribe if you haven't already. And I will catch you next time. Bye for now.